Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Behind the Page. I'm CJ, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. You know him from his work on Power Rangers, Star Trek, Rogue Sun, and a lot more, but most recently, Justice League The Atom Project. Welcome to the show, Ryan Parrott. How's it going?
It's good, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So, before we get into talking about what you're working on now, whenever I have people on the show for the first time, I really like to ask about how long they've been involved in and have had this interest in comics. And especially when reading your work and from other shows you've been on that I've listened to, it's really clear that you love writing these books and the work that you get to do. So, I was wondering how long you've been reading comics to start.
Oh man, reading like probably for 30 years. I there was a comic book story in Bakersfield, California, where my grandparents was where I was born. My grandfather used to take me to this store called Inner Sanctum Comics, and I remember the first comic he bought me was Death in the Family, the black
Mhm.
trade with Batman holding the broken Robin, and I was like, I want that. And so, which is a good place to start. But that was the first comic. I remember that was the first comic that I bought because I remember getting that and taking that home and reading that. I also my stepbrother was really into Punisher, and would like had like a whole box of that. So whenever he was done reading Punisher, I would like kind of wander in and he'd like give it to me. Like he'd be like, "Hey, you can read this." And like I remember for a really long time, I didn't realize you had to read the caption boxes. I just read the dialogue, which is like so. I was like, I was so young. I was like, that's for something else. I don't understand what that is. So like weird
Yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah, but I was primed for like the what really got me excited for comics was Image. Like I was like 13 when Image started, and it was like the I bought every single Image book that you could. I mean, literally, like that was the first pull box I ever got. I just literally they give you like the little piece of paper and you checked everything you wanted to do, and I just said anything with Image, and I bought like I literally they ended up taking the box away from me after like 4 months because I couldn't afford all the books I wanted. So it's a little weird to actually have an Image book now, considering it was such a huge impact on me.
Yeah, it's got to feel awesome. And like I wanted to talk about Justice League before Rogue Sun, but just like especially with Rogue Sun being such like a legacy-based book, it's got to feel so cool like stepping into the legacy of Image and all those people that you grew up reading. That has to be the coolest feeling ever.
I mean, it still feels weird. Like I remember, I think just at the last convention I was at, I was sitting next to Kyle, and he like brought up something about the book, and I just literally stopped him because we were having like a hard time with something. And I was like, let's just hold on for a second. We are talking about our own Image superheroes. Like that's like let's not forget that that's what we're having a hard time with is because we have too much. We have to do too much for our own superheroes. Let's just enjoy that. So like that part is like never gonna get old,
Yeah.
and yeah, like I don't know, like it's weird when you feel like a fraud. You feel like I don't deserve to be here. Like it's all imposter syndrome. It's just weird to be a part of something that is yeah, to be like to like I was at New York, and Todd McFarlane was coming down the down like the walk when he does, like it's like the parting of the Red Sea, right? Because everybody's just like so excited. And he came down, and Kyle was like, "Do you want me to introduce you?" I'm like, "No, dude, no, not right now. Let's not do it." He's like, "Shut up, I'm gonna do it." And so he came up, and Kyle introduced me to him, and I like shook his hand. He was like, "Oh, Rogue Sun, I read that," and I was like, "No, you didn't. No, that's impossible." So yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that like never goes away. Like that's the part where I'm still just a fan and get excited and like just it doesn't feel real, and I don't think it ever will, honestly. Like so like we all feel I feel like I'm just like everybody else. I'm just like this is all an illusion. It's not reality. So yeah.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. So you've been reading for that long. How long have you known you've wanted to write comics and be like involved in the space?
So I went to art school to draw comics. That was the first thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid. I drew all the way growing up. That was my identity. I was Ryan the artist. So I went to art school thinking I was going to comic books, and realized real quickly that I was never going to be, J. Scott Campbell or Jim Lee or any of that stuff. And I was like, okay, so this isn't going to work. And so I sort of pivoted into like film and TV and started working in that world. And while I was doing that in college, there were some friends of mine that I met who were like, "Hey, we're going to the comic store to do it." And I hadn't bought comics in like a long time, and I was like, "Yeah, let's go." So I went back and started picking them up again, and I was like, "Oh wow, I forgot how much I love these." And so while I was, and then that was just it became like a hobby again. It was fun. It was like going back to your first love. And so I remember when I was working at Bad Robot, Kyle, I met Kyle in college. We both met each other when we were doing film, and so I knew he was. I helped him in his early days when he was first getting into with Marvel and DC and everything. And so I was like, but I didn't think about it as like something that I could write. I knew comics, but I didn't think about it as like, oh, I'll write a comic. And then in the middle of that, at Bad Robot, Kyle called me one day when he was in the middle of doing Gates of Gotham, and was like, hey, because I was working as JJ's assistant at the time, I was on the desk, and so he's like, hey, I just got Nightwing and Deathstroke in the same week. And it's like, and I got to finish this book like before we can go to ship. Can you help me work on it? I was like, yeah. So after work, I would get in my car and I'd drive over there at like 7 o'clock, and we'd write till like 9 or 10 o'clock in the same room and get the books done. And then I was like, oh, this is not. It's not that it wasn't hard. I was like, it just demystified it a little bit. I was like, oh, okay, it's just like writing a screenplay. It's just a little different. The formatting's a little different. And so as I did that, I ended up going back to Bad Robot. And when Gates of Gotham came out, JJ saw it and was like, "Oh, do you want to do more comics?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, we do Star Trek. Do you want to talk to the guy who does that?" And so that's kind of how I segued into it. I was like, "Yeah." So I went over and talked to that guy and started doing stuff with them, and then I got bit. It was like it went from I got lucky enough to do that, and then go into Power Rangers and all that stuff. So like it wasn't that I wasn't intending to do it. It was like I hadn't realized. I made this comment in a panel one time, which was like, for like, it's weird when you realize people make the things that you like. You know, like that
Yeah.
weird moment where you're like I remember thinking the first person I ever realized who was behind the scenes of comics was Stan Lee, because he would do the little drawing in the corner like, "Hey, Spidey fans," and I was like, "Wait, that guy makes these?" And so like it just, for me, I was like, people aren't gonna hire me to write comics. Like you just read them, no one makes them. So like it took me a really long time to realize that was something you could do. And then what was great was like I realized I loved it, and kind of got into it. So yeah, I don't know why I thought, I think because when I grew up, like the artists were the thing, right? Image was like the artists were like rock stars, and so
Mhm.
I just assumed that the artists like wrote them as well. And then somewhere along the line that shifted, and I sort of realized, oh yeah, there's writers too. So like it took me a long time to sort of get over the idea that like, oh, that's something that maybe I could do.
Justice League: The Atom Project just recently started premiering. I'm gonna read the pitch for it, and then I have a couple questions about it. So, Justice League: The Atom Project, for those who haven't read it, in the wake of absolute power, the superheroes of planet Earth are in chaos, and it's up to the newly reformed Justice League to restore order to that chaos. Enter Ray Palmer and Ryan Choi, together the heroes called Atom. These brilliant minds get to work crafting the world's first superpower relocation and backup system, codenamed the Atom Project, but not everyone wants their powers back, and Captain Atom is hell-bent on preventing his missing atomic abilities from ever being found. So, you and John Ridley have been writing this series together with Mike Perkins on art. How's it been working on this series? How did this series first come to you? Was it something DC pitched to you guys or you guys brought to them?
It's the first part. It's been awesome. It's so crazy to go from like working on your own books, like just like Rogue Sun or Power Rangers, which I did write multiple books, but like it was always just like that one. I was the one in charge of it all. So to be a part of the DC universe, to do a book that is part and connected to other books at the same time, where like Mark Waid is like writing Justice League Unlimited, and he's like, oh, this thing's happening in that, so now you have to write your book and kind of adjust to that, and if you have an idea you can send it to him. That part is crazy. Like that part, I'm it's sort of getting thrown in the deep end of the pool and you just start swimming. So I'm learning that, and that one's fun. But the concept for the book came. Matt Levine was the guy that I worked on Power Ranger books with. He's one of the editors. He started over at DC, and so we always talked about doing some stuff together. And so we just started like throwing ideas around for like a few months. We'd have coffee every once in a while and just talk comic books and stuff. And one day he called me and he was like, "Hey, how do you feel about the Atom?" And I was like, "I love the Atom." I go, "He hasn't really ever had like a really great run. Not that the other runs aren't good. I don't mean that to dissuade any of the previous writers. Just that thing of like that seminal book that you're like, if I come up with somebody, I'm like, oh, you want to know the Atom? Here you go. This is the book you got to read, right? Like it doesn't have a lot. I think maybe sort of the Atom is like the one that I remember, but like, so we were like, yeah, there's an opportunity here, and so he sort of pitched me a little bit with what was going on with DC, and coming out of Absolute Power, it was going to change, and he was like, what about thinking about him as sort of like Oppenheimer, about this guy who sort of gets this incredible responsibility sort of thrust upon him, and him trying to figure out a way to sort of help and protect his friends. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. And so we started spinning that idea around for a little while. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cough. I apologize.
No worries.
And, and then they brought John in to as we started talking about it because John, John's just like an elevated man. Like anytime I hate being on like interviews with him because he'll have these incredibly eloquent answers, and I'm behind him going, "Yeah, I'm just happy to be here. Everything's really exciting." But he came in and he was the one we played a lot of ideas around with the idea of what would it be like to try and get if the powers were out there and some people had them and some people had the wrong ones, and like how do you deal with that? Like how do you deal with the aftermath of that? And John was the one who came in and said, "What if we centered the book on Captain Adam? What if he had lost his powers and he is sort of the key to get everybody getting them back?" And in a way, and what I loved about that was it also sort of thrust Captain Adam into a story that I hadn't really done. So suddenly everybody named the Atom was in the Atom Project, which was
Yeah.
great. So that's how it started, and it all sort of evolved out of that. And it's fun. It's the coolest thing about it. It really is exciting. Is that it's not just you. You are working with your editors, the writers, the artists. There's a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot of collaboration. And that part, I think, I actually have really enjoyed because it makes it impossible to have writer's block because you have to move at such a cadence. And also, you have people who know these stories and characters so well that you can throw ideas at them and they can just throw them back. And so it's like being a little bit in like a writer's room, like in TV. That's the closest I can attribute to. So it's been daunting and scary. I think I just turned in an issue. I just finished an issue today. So yeah, it's fun. I hope I get to do more because it's really fun to play in the sandbox. But yeah, it can be a little scary sometimes.
No, yeah, that makes sense. And it's been so cool. Like you said, a lot of people have noticed that like the Atom and even Captain Atom have kind of been like underused in recent years, that like this is the perfect time, this all-in initiative to bring them in. The highlight of issue 1 for me, which I loved by the way, was definitely the contrast and like the dialogue, the discourse between Ray and Ryan, the two Atoms and stuff. And you kind of getting their kind of different point of view on the situation, with Ray being very get the mission done no matter how many lies you have to tell, and Ryan kind of wanting to have a more human approach and seeing through like, some cracks in like Ray's thinking kind of. What can you really tease about, the conflict that might come between their differences and like the ethics that might be brought up in the series because of that?
Um, I mean, I'm glad you like that a lot because that's one of the more fun parts of the book is sort of trying to like one of the things that we talked about early on was it was like some people. If you look at Oppenheimer, right, you can talk
Mhm.
about him. It's like, is he a hero or is he a villain? Is he the one who helped win the war, or did he open up this Pandora's box that will never be able to be, closed again? And so, and what kind of person? How do you deal with that? And when you are given a task to do, is it more important to do the task, or do you have to take in consideration the ethics behind it while you're dealing with it, right? All those are things that Ray's dealing with all the time. And so it made it really interesting because to sort of, he gets in the same way, he sort of gets thrown into the deep end, and it's like, okay, like he's just dedicated to the idea. There's that great line in Jurassic Park, right? It's like you were so preoccupied with whether or not you should, you never or could, you never thought if you should. And
Yeah.
that's the part that's the thing that I kept doing with Ray is just sort of really having him. He's as the older Adam. He's been in the Justice League for a while. All of these people are his friends. A lot of these superheroes who have lost their powers are people that he knows, and so he has
Mhm.
a personal stake in getting them back the part of their identity. And I thought that was an interesting the angle for him. But with Ryan, and I will say this: never write a comic book where the main character's name is yours because it's so
Yeah.
confusing. But Ryan, what's so fun about having Ryan in there is that he just has this sort of the younger generation sort of approach to science, and the younger sort of and there's a we tried to give him more of a humanistic approach to things. He
Mhm.
sees things more from. I don't think every experiment has. He looks at it. I think when he sees an experiment, he sees the human costs that come with that. And
Mhm.
so the idea of putting those two together, where they're both aiming towards the same sort of objective, but have sort of different. They have different moral check marks with which they are willing to go and willing how far they're willing to sort of adjust things. So that's the fun part. And then it's sort of sitting Captain Adam at the middle of it, who is a military man, somebody
Yeah.
who has sort of spent his entire life, spit shined and doing what his origin is literally he was at such a low spot that he basically was like, I'm more valuable dead than alive. And then this guy suddenly and then gets this power and becomes one of the most powerful men on the planet, and the idea of having that taken away from him, where's his head at? So that's the fun part about it is that you have just such interesting perspectives on power, what it means to people, and how far you're willing to go to get it. And so when the best parts of the book, I think, writing it for me has been whenever you have a turn in the story and all three of those characters get to chime in on what they think and how they feel, and their relationships get strained because of it. And as you can see in the first issue, Captain Adam goes from being this loyal test subject to somebody on the run from it all.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the story is when you've been, when you go from being a grunt to somebody who's a little bit more important and has a larger part in the play, and suddenly your opinion matters on things. How does that change your friendships? How does that change what you're willing to do and how far you're willing to go? So, we have a lot of fun with it. It gets a little crazy going forward. But it's, and also just trying to figure out a way to make that all not just you don't want it to just be a lab book where everybody
Mhm.
sits around talking about morality and theory. You got to, it's a superhero book. You still got to punch people. So like finding ways to do that is fun. So like, I guess that's the best way you can sort of like teasing it forward. That trio, those relationships will be strained. They will be adjusted. They will, friends will become enemies. Enemies will become friends. I think they're all trying to do the same thing, but they have different ways of going about it. And so that's sort of the key to the next 3 or 4 issues.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you brought up too like the superhero aspect of it in contrast to like, all those more philosophical conversations raised by it and everything. Just from the first issue, I mean, Ryan was my favorite character to read and stuff, like just the way he presents himself as a superhero. I love what he does with his powers in this issue. Like when most people think about the Atom, they really think about just like the shrinking powers, but
Yeah,
it really makes a point to say in this issue, like they all have genius level intellect. Like they have all these kind of gadgets and everything. We see Ryan change the molecular composition of a car. That whole sequence is awesome. What I kept
right.
thinking when I was reading too that I wanted to raise is I kept thinking about how difficult it must be, kind of from your perspective, maybe to write the shrinking sequences almost. Like, how do you write that into the script? But like, when we first see Ryan shrink, we see like the panels change with it and everything. And then there's the other sequence with the car when he's still shrunk, but a bit closer up to the camera. How do you kind of present that in your script? Do you go to Perkins with thinking like, this is how I want the transformations to look, or kind of let him do his own thing?
It's a good question. It's actually evolved from issue to issue. In the very first issue, I that was one of the more difficult. It's really funny you brought that up because it's one of those things I haven't talked about, but it's one of the more complicated parts of the script because I was like, well, how many panels do I need every time they get small or get large? Like, how many panels do I need to do that? Because like with comics, it's all real estate and space.
Yeah.
And what I realized very quickly was after the first issue, the way Mike, I didn't really, or I would tell Mike, he grows from this. I was using panels. I was like, okay, so we're going to use a panel to grow. But what I realized very quickly was after like the first pass, Mike just has Ray or Ryan sort of expand beyond the borders of the panel. And so I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I don't actually have to set aside an entire panel to do that. He'll just do that in the way that they use the meta moment of breaking through the panels as a way to show growth. And I thought that was a really clever thing that Mike did. So it freed me up a little bit so I didn't have to do that. So I've gotten to the point, I just say grow or shrinks now and then kind of let Mike handle it.
Yeah.
Um, which I know sounds kind of lazy, but it's meant like he knows what he's doing, and also he just knows how he wants the page to lay out and how he wants to represent the action. So it kind of freed me up to just be like, "Yep, this is what he does, and you'll figure it out." But I at the beginning I was very worried that I was gonna need like it's like almost like do I need to write a transformation montage out of every single moment they do that? Like in the way that
Yeah.
somebody does like a motion montage. I was like, is that what I'm gonna have to do? And Mike just finds his way around it. And God bless him for being so economical because if it had taken longer, I think the book would be a significantly shorter book.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also wanted to ask about Captain Atom. Like Captain Atom has been interpreted a lot of different ways in a lot of different comics. A lot of people know Dr. Manhattan's kind of based on the Captain Atom character too. What kind of sort of comics and what stories did you pull from when getting this interpretation of Captain Atom? I know you went into it a bit about his role in this story, starting as the test subject, but then we see, I mean, the issue opens with like it kind of feels like a spy thriller, him on the run and everything like that. So, what really did you pull from with Captain Adam's role in this story?
For him, I went back and I read a lot of his first issues. So because there's like 2 or 3 different iterations of his origin story. I think one was he was like there was an early version where he was like a prisoner who was like in prison or he was like wrongfully accused of murdering somebody
Yeah.
or something like that. And we were like, I don't want to do that. It doesn't feel like the character that we've come to know. It doesn't seem like that feels like a very different person. But I liked the first issue. I think it was in 52, which was the one where you see sort of him like as an Air Force pilot and sort of deciding that he's like kind of like done being like the idea of like there's nothing really to live for, so I'm going to enlist in sort of this experiment and see, and maybe I'll make the world a better place in my own death, and then becoming this godlike character, which is such a cool ironic twist. So I like that. I went back. The earliest memories I had of Captain Atom was actually from the Batman Superman Public Enemies book, where Lex Luthor's president, and he actually calls in Shazam and Captain Atom to take on Superman, and that's kind of how I actually remembered because I loved. Sorry about that. I loved how like Captain Atom shows up and Superman's a little like, oh, I got to deal with this guy, and I was like, oh, he's a little intimidated by this guy, and also like such a cool visual, and he just like this, he's just he feels so powerful. He feels like there's just nothing you could do to stop this guy, and so I really enjoyed that version of that. So and then I picked that over a few stories that I found here and there. I really loved the relationship between him and Major Force. I just thought that was such a fun this
Mhm.
idea of sort of like they're both sort of military guys, but obviously Captain Atom is sort of like this sort of like shinier, holier than thou, sort of like Captain America kind of person, and then Major Force feels almost like the Winter Soldier element of this idea that he's more of the covert thing, and that he sort of does the darker stuff, and the idea that they are both enemies and sort of like mirrors of each other. So I really enjoyed that element of the story. Not to say he won't show up. I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
something. Yeah. So those are the things I pulled from was predominantly it was but like also he's kind of a blank slate in a lot of places. Doesn't have a lot of major runs. He's in a lot of books. He's in team books a lot, but he's only usually there to sort of be the heavy. He's there to be the powerful one that comes in, says a few lines, and then kind of ushers himself out there. So it was really great when John Ridley was just like, hey, let's really dig into what it's like to be a person who has the power of a god and then no longer has that power and is wondering what his purpose is. And I thought that was a really great way to approach it and just sort of have him go from somebody who um, the world like the I just imagine being able to fly around the earth and then not being able to walk down the street, like that's a pretty big shift and what that would mean and how small the world would fall and how small you would feel, and the idea of like finding himself in a much more complicated game and being such a I also like the idea of him being a soldier who suddenly finds himself having to actually make his own decisions. I thought that was a fun play, but those are the ways we approached him.
That is really cool. I think it's in that the way you explain that it kind of reminded me of, I'm pretty sure it's Action Comics 500. There's a line about like the dynamic between like Superman and Crypto, and it's about how Crypto is kind of the only person that can relate to Superman in the sense of like the only person who knows what it feels like to have like a bullet bounce off your skin. That like I
Yeah,
really feel like this issue, especially the Captain Atom moments, really put you in the perspective of thinking like the how it really feels to have this power. Like why doesn't Captain Atom want it so bad? Like why he's on
yeah.
the run. That I think
Yeah,
that
yeah. And we like the idea of there was in some of the earlier iterations we talked. I don't know if it kind of there's always these ideas that you really love and then they kind of fall out because of plot reasons or because you don't have space. But we talked about this idea of like having him get in like a he's like riding a bike and he like accidentally crashes the bike and scratches his knee, and he was like thinking he's like I haven't felt real pain like that in a really long time because I've been so powerful for so long, and the idea of like feeling that for the first time would almost feel like you've been woken up. Like this idea of
yeah.
like if you're that strong and you're that powerful, like would you feel what would it be like to suddenly feel like if you never feel cold, like if you fly around in space, right? You probably don't feel cold the same way regular people feel cold. So what would it be like to feel cold and be
Yeah,
like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And so we actually deal with that a little bit in the second issue, which I thought was kind of fun. So
that's cool. Well, I can't wait for it. The second issue comes out. I think it's February 5th, second issue of the Atom Project comes out. So make sure you go add that to your pull list and catch up on issue one if you haven't yet. I want to ask a couple things about Rogue Sun. You had mentioned before that you and Kyle knew each other in college, and now he's of course doing Radiant Black. How does it like, is he how this opportunity for Rogue Sun came about to you? And just how cool is it getting to work on a friend like this for a project like the Massiverse?
Oh, if Kyle didn't make a book at Image, I would never have made a book at Image. Like I am a writer and I am bad at sort of like all of the logistics of comic books, like all the money and the promoting and the marketing. I'm terrible at it, but Kyle is so good at it and he's so wonderful. So I couldn't do any of that stuff. But the way it all came was so like I said, Kyle and I were friends in college. And then we both got hired to work on Power Rangers separately. I got hired to do the comic book tie-in and or the movie tie-in, and he was working on the main line. And so we started working on that stuff together. And then in the middle of that, he ended up like he'd done 25 issues or he'd done like 30 issues of that, and he was going to leave and go do something else. And I took over the book. And so while he was doing that, I invited him to football games. We were at a USC game, and he's like, I'm having a really good time with this Radiant Black book that I'm doing at Image. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And he's like, have you ever wanted to do your own superhero? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I got an idea for one. And I kind of half pitched him Rogue Sun when I was sitting there. He's like, dude, we should totally do it. We could have our own little universe. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I didn't really think he was serious. And then like the next day he was like, hey, like, what do you think? I found you an artist. And I was like, I found this guy named Abel. He's amazing. You should take a look at his work. And I did. And I was like, no way, this guy's available. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we pitched it to Eric Stevenson at Image. He was like, yeah, let's do it. And so it all was kind of a whirlwind. I don't think if Kyle hadn't been so aggressive about it, I don't know if I'd ever done it. But the fun part about it though is like and then we brought on obviously Matt Groom did Inferno Go Red and Melissa Flores was doing Dead Lucky. And so we have all these people that are all just friends of people that we worked with on Power Ranger books or in the comic world. And so we just kind of work on stuff together and like get on Zoom calls and work on the supermassive crossovers and stuff like that. So it's comics can be very isolating because you are just at your computer typing. A lot of artists live in different countries. So sometimes it can feel like you're just like writing something, you send it out in the world, and then it comes back, right? But what's really great about the Massiverse is it's all my friends. It's people that I talk to and hey, I saw a movie. What do you guys think? And we talk about that. So it's like it's a little bit of just like hanging out with your buddies and just happen to make superheroes. And so like that part makes it, I think, a lot of fun. It makes it just infinitely more. It can be scary doing a book by yourself because I've done a lot of books of my own that are by myself, and they never have the same fun and the same energy that the Massiverse has.
That is really cool. Building off one thing you mentioned in there, the Rogue Sun costume I just think is one of the coolest designs ever in like modern comics and stuff.
Thanks.
I picked up the first issue on my friend and old roommate at the time, Josh, had pointed it out. He was like, "Dude, this is the coolest thing ever. It just looks so cool. It's in the same universe as Radiant Black." So we both grabbed it. I think I got the A cover, he got the B. And the other characters in this series, like Suave, Hellbent, the Doorman, are just on the same caliber in terms of design. How does Abel keep doing it? Just issue after
I
issue.
do not know. I do. Hellbent was me. I'm going to take full credit for Hellbent. That was me.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, no. I mean, it was really funny because like I remember when I was like, hey, like he sent me a design for Rogue Sun. I was like, hey, Rogue Sun, and it was a little more tech, like a little more cyber. And I was like, no, no, no. It should be. I was like, it should be like a knight that's on fire. And then he sent one drawing back, and I was like, I was like, add a little more fire, and we're good. Like he has such an incredible visual aesthetic, and also I really love the one thing that's been so fun about him designing all the different characters is that like there's like a reoccurring motifs like the folding of leather and sort of like the patches and stuff. It all feels connected. It all feels like there's like he has a very strong sort of design aesthetic, and it weirdly makes every time he draws. I don't give him a lot of notes. Like he does stuff like one pass, maybe two passes. I think Hellbent was the one we had the most time on.
Mhm.
There's a new villain that shows up in 25 that I was like, I was like, hey, like I got this idea. I was like, I got this idea for a character, and I was like, I think he could have like some stuff on his arms and like a hole in his chest. And he's like, got it. And then he did one design. I'm like, great, we're good. So like, it's really helpful.
The designs are amazing, and you keep on finding amazing way to tell the stories in this book. One of my favorite issues was issue 7, the Choose Your Own Adventure one. That's just so interactive to like a whole new level. You really have to put yourself in like Dylan's shoes and stuff to keep going in the issue. Issue 19, also a flip book issue. What goes into coming up with these different ways to tell this story in this format? Or do you start with thinking, I'm telling this story and I thought of it would work really well as a choose your own adventure, or do you think like I want to do a choose your own adventure? How can I work this into the story with any of those different storytelling devices?
I think it's an interesting question with like the chicken or the egg. Like I knew I wanted to do like a choose your own adventure just because I loved growing up, and so that would be fun. And I knew, so I was like, oh, that'll be kind of a fun thing to try. And then when I was working with my buddy Nick, who's writing with a book with me now for a little while to help me with some of the lifting on it, we just talked a lot about like, wouldn't it be fun to do a time traveling villain that showed different realities, and you could use that, like make the story dependent of, like, have the villain be the reason for the change in the format. And then I think the biggest part about it, without spoiling it for me, that's fine. It's spoiling at this point. It's been a few years. Was like I remember the coolest part was we had an idea that we're like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if there was like a 2-page scene that like you couldn't get to unless you like read the comic book all the way. Like there was no way to it. And then we thought, but that was just like a little gimme. And then we were like, you know what would be more interesting is what if we made it like, what if we figured out a way to make it so that the reader had to do the same thing that Dylan had to do in order to get out of this book? Like, how can you make it so that their choice is like they have to see the world the same way Dylan does. They have to make the same choice. And when we did that, I think that's when it opened up the story. I remember at the very last minute, I was like, I got really, really nervous, like right before we went to the printer. I was like, I think we should change it. I think we should just make it. And they were like, no, man. Nick actually told me, he's like, relax. Your readers are smart. They'll figure it out. And at the very worst, it's like a 26-page comic. They'll just read through it. It'll be okay. It's not like a novel. And so I'm really glad he talked me out of like getting nervous. I didn't want anybody to have a bad experience. I was really afraid that people would pick it up and get mad. And I've had like one or two people tell me that, but the vast majority of people were like, if they got frustrated, they felt rewarded that they stuck it through, and
Yeah.
that they ultimately felt like, oh, I get it now, and it was like that was the energy of it. So that was something that we always talk about, which is like also just trying to find things like when you do a new book at Image, when you're doing a book that's not Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, you got to find things that make it unique. And the cool thing is like I said, working at DC, there's a lot of opinions, a lot of voices in there. When you do your own book, the only person's opinion is mine. Like I can do anything I want. And so you should, any creators out there, anybody who's doing independent books, you got to like push the envelope, like do things that people would tell you not to, or do things that are risky, because that's the only way that, I mean, I don't know about you. I've read thousands of comic books. And so like, what's going to make a comic book that you pick up something you remember, something that feels different, something that feels like that inspires you and gets excited. So like the flip book thing was something that Nick and I've been wanting to do for 25 years, because I just love that the idea that you have 10 pages of art, and then depending how you change it only works in a comic book, right? It's
Yeah.
like you have art, and then you can change the dialogue, and it changes everything about the whole thing. Like you change the captions, it changes what you're looking at. It changes you can see the same art. I look at your face. If I change the caption, it changes the way the art looks to you. And I thought that was something that was really, really fun. So like we're always just trying to find stuff that gets beat, that as a fan I would be excited to see, and then see if we can find a way to make it connect to the story and connect to the characters.
Yeah, that's amazing. The other thing too, and kind of my last question is what makes Rogue Sun, at least to me, feel so personal and like just you really want to keep reading is really the family aspect of it and everything. And the more you read, like the more the story goes on, the more family elements get added to the book. And especially now that we have the second active Rogue Sun, I'm sure it's just going to be more family focused than ever. So I wanted to ask how writing the dynamic when there's two Rogue Suns versus when it's just Dylan going, and what else you can tease about this future upcoming story arc?
It's the fun part about having another Rogue Sun step into the story is that it I like the idea that Dylan was just like, oh yeah, I'm the guy. I'm the guy, and I'll be the guy, and it'll be okay. And the idea is suddenly it's like, and there's even moments where he's like, I don't know if I want to be the guy. This is too hard. And then the minute another Rogue Sun shows, it was like, well, hold on, I was the guy. I want to stay the guy. It's that thing where it's like that thing where like with the minute you can't have something, you want it more. And so that part I enjoyed. And I just like the idea that when you bring in the family dynamic is something that I think is really the core of the book. The relationship between Dylan and Marcus is exactly what we from day one has been what the whole book's about. It's about having your parents push their responsibilities upon you and how you can deal with that. And like I said, the first arc of this book is basically just a divorce told through the form of superhero powers. And so when you bring in all, I guess I can say it like it's out there, or it's on the cover. When you bring in Ari as the new Rogue
Yeah.
Son, now you have a sister and a brother and a sister who is already been, a little jealous that Dylan has a relationship with her father, even now that he's gone. And does she want that? And how does her being a rogue son allow her to have that relationship? And does it change? It's a lot easier to be on the outside and criticizing someone. It's a lot harder when you actually have to do it yourself. So I think it's about finding that stuff. It's about the hierarchy of relationships within a family. It's about sort of and also I think it's about figuring out ultimately sort of like what the end game of this series is. Like Morningstar is a big part, has been a big part of the book since issue one.
Mhm.
What's his intentions and what's he going moving forward? And are you going to see, does having two rogue sons that he has to deal with change the way that he goes about the game? That's the biggest sort of thing that we've been playing with, is sort of like, how do you change your tactics when the rules of the game have changed a little bit? So, but at the end of the day, it's going to still be a family story. It's still about Dylan dealing with step parents and his parents and what he feels and what he is, and still being that jerk that he's been from the beginning, but hopefully a little better. So yeah, I don't know if that spoils anything or if that teases anything, but we'll have a lot more new villains. There's still stuff coming in. There's the ideas that, like, I've wanted to do for a really long time. There's a villain that I have an idea, a character that I want to bring in so bad because I just love their name, but I can't spoil it yet. But like, I love the Rogues Gallery of Rogue Son. Like, that's my favorite part to do, is just come up with new villains. So hopefully people don't get too annoyed if I keep coming up with more of them. So
No, yeah, the villains are so cool, especially just at the start because you pick up with Dylan and there's been all these villains Rogue Sun has fought before him that like there were just so many great ones to get invested in from the get-go.
thank you. It's been fun to like it's a nice balance because you have like the ones that Marcus created, right? And then
Yeah.
you have the ones that Dylan accidentally makes, or there's new versions and stuff like that. I remember Scott Snyder's run on Batman, the was it Dark Mirror or Black Mirror?
I think Black Mirror, yeah.
Black Mirror, yeah. That one I thought was really cool because I remember reading something he said, which was that like Gotham City's an entity, and when Dick became Bruce Wayne, or sorry, when Dick became Batman, uh, Gotham City created new villains to deal with him, and I always thought that was a really cool way to think about a city going like. And Morningstar is kind of like my thing. It's like, oh, okay, the villains that he created to take on Marcus are different than the villains he created to take on Dylan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, those are all the questions I have for today. So everyone make sure you go add both Justice League The Atom Project and Rogue Sun to your pull boxes. Issue 2 of The Atom Project comes out February 5th and Rogue Sun returns on March 12th. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.